To get started on this exercise, you should have downloaded the cartoon head and texture JPEGs from the class Moodle page. In addition to this exercise is going to start on page 273 of your textbook. Now, the textbook is slightly out of date in regards to how the tools function and operate, so this video is going to point out some of those major differences. In addition to this, we're not going to do the entire exercise that's in the book. Instead, we're going to stop short and do a few things slightly different. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is to create our new document. Let's go to Create New once we launch Adobe Animate. And inside the New Document dialog box, we're going to set this up to be 1920 by 1080 pixels. Do make sure pixels is your unit. Your frame rate can be set to 24 frames per second. And your platform type, we're going to keep it at ActionScript 3. When we say create, this will give us our document that we need. In order to see everything on here, let's go up to the very top right and let's do Show All. This will show everything that we're working on for this stage. Now let's place that cartoon head image that we can trace off. So I'm going to go up to File, down to Import, and let's import it to the stage that we're working on. With that done, we need to find the file. In my case, it's on the desktop. Choose the cartoon head. Now, if you can't select that cartoon head, one thing you need to do is underneath Enable, make sure all openable formats is selected. Sometimes it'll have one of these other formats selected and it won't allow you to select the JPEG format that we have. But when you have all openable, that should allow you to get the cartoon head that you see up here. With the cartoon head selected, we'll say Open. And you can see this is placed right on top of our first layer. Now we want to make this a special layer that doesn't play and allows us to draw on top of it, almost as a sketch or as a guide. So the first thing I want to do is go down to my timeline, and for this layer, I'm going to rename this the sketch layer. Also, I'm going to control click on it or two-finger click on it, and I'm going to set this up as a guide layer. Guide layers will not play whenever you go up to your control panel to test your movie, and therefore it'll be out of the way if you ever needed to animate something. Notice that it changes the icon as well. Now, all of the drawing that we do needs to happen on a separate layer so it doesn't interfere with this drawing that we've done. I'm going to go back down to my timeline and give myself just a little bit more room by clicking and dragging that up. And I'm going to create a new layer on top of the sketch by clicking on the little plus sign to add a new layer. We're going to call this the head layer. And I'm going to select this sketch layer and click on the little lock icon. This way, I won't accidentally select the sketch, move it around, or do anything to that layer. Everything that we do will happen on the head layer that remains unlocked. So to start drawing off the head, the tool that I'm going to use is going to be the oval tool. Do make sure you've got the oval and not the oval primitive tool. With that tool selected, let's go over to our properties panel, and we're going to set our fill color to be this middle orange. We're also going to keep our stroke set to none or null, so make sure to select the little red dash line on top of this. We won't worry about that. Another important thing to do is to make sure your drawing mode is turned on. Now there's two different places to find object drawing mode, and to be honest, it's a little bit confusing. The object drawing mode is this button right here. It's found under the tool subpanel of your properties panel, and when you turn it on, you should be able to select it and it will highlight. The other place to find it is at the very bottom of your toolbox down here. When it's turned on, it's difficult to see, but you can see that it's highlighted right here. With object drawing mode turned on, whenever I click and drag and create a new object, if I was to select that object, you see how it has a blue bounding box around the entire area. Now, if I was to draw the same thing again, this time I'm going to turn object drawing mode off and click and drag. When I select it this time with drawing mode turned off, I don't get a blue bounding box, I get the little dot pattern inside of it. So to test out any drawing, always make a little drawing, and to tell if it's turned on, you've got a little bounding box. If it's turned off, then you've got just a little dotted pattern. As we draw off this shape, I'll kind of show you the differences and why we would choose one versus the other. So I'm going to select this away, select your oval tool, and make sure drawing mode is turned on. Again, it should be highlighted with a little light bit around it. To make the oval, simply click and drag over the existing area. Now if your oval is off by a little bit, that's totally fine. Yours doesn't have to look 100% perfect to the picture we're tracing. Also, we can go up and start to make edits to your oval. So click and drag over the facial area. One way you can edit the shape is to choose your free transform tool. And whenever you select the object, of course, you can move it around and you can make it taller or wider as needed. Another way to edit your shape is to select the oval tool. And with the oval tool selected, you can hold down the command key as you click and hover over one edge. Notice that when you do this, holding down the command key, your cursor changes and has a little curve to the edge of it. Doing this will allow you to click on an edge and make an adjustment to just that edge. So in this case, we can bring this down just a bit. We can widen out just the sides, and we can make the chin a little bit taller as well. So using between both of those, the holding down command and the oval tool, and also using the free transform tool, you can draw off the basic shape of his head. Let's do the same thing for the ears. I'm going to grab the oval tool. Again, we will click and drag to create an ear, hold down the command key, and then you can click on the edge of the ear and drag it in until you get the shape that you want. It does take a little bit of practice to get close to what you need, but again, if yours is off by a little bit, that is okay. Let's do the same for the other ear. Oval tool, click and drag, and then if you need to move it around, you can use your free transform tool to place it right where you want it to go. Then select the oval tool again, hold down the command key, and drag in to adjust the ear as necessary. And finally, let's also do the chin. So we'll click and drag over the chin. Again, hold down Control, and then readjust it to fill in the areas that you have. Now, one thing that's difficult whenever you do this kind of tracing is that I can no longer see what's underneath the area that I'm working on. And sometimes I want to be able to see that area and my original sketch and what I'm drawing. So here's a good trick to know. I'm going to go to my head layer and Control or two-finger click on it and open up the Properties panel. Inside the Properties, for just the head layer, you can turn off the visibility of it by viewing this layer just in outline mode. So when I do this, you can see this converts everything that was filled in to these nice little outlines, and I can tell where the edges are. Now it is still a little bit difficult to see these edges and the edges of my sketch. So the other thing I can do is to go to my sketch layer and Control or two-finger click on it and open up the properties for the sketch layer. And let's drop the opacity of just this layer. Instead of it being at 100%, if I drop it down to say 50%, now when I say OK, it's a little bit easier to see exactly what's there. So from here I can do things like go in and move my ears in and readjust it to, let's see, I'm going to grab my oval tool again to do that, and readjust it so that it's looking a little bit more correct to my drawing. So take some time and adjust your drawing so that it fits and you're comfortable with the results that you have. Once you're finished, you can go back to the head layer, open up the properties, and then you can turn off the outlines by unchecking it and saying OK to go back to normal mode. Now let's focus on doing the hair. For the hair, let's choose our rectangle tool. With the rectangle tool selected, let's go back over to our properties. And let's choose a fill color that's a little bit more of a medium brown. We'll say this one up here. Again, we don't need a stroke, and do make sure you're still working with object drawing mode checked on, so it should be nice and highlighted. Now, creating the hair tends to be a little bit tricky, so we're going to take this one part at a time. I'll zoom in so you can see it. With the rectangle tool selected, click and drag a simple rectangle between his ears that goes from one ear to the other. Now we're going to warp this rectangle using those selection tricks. The first thing I'm going to do is hold down the Command key, and when I hover over this top edge, you can see my cursor changes, and we'll click and drag all the way up into the cap area. Let's do the same for the bottom. Again, hold down the Command key, click on the bottom edge, and drag it upward. So right about there. Next, let's hold the Command key down, and when you click on a corner, in this case I got the corner here, you can see it turns into a little right angle bracket on your cursor. And we're going to bring this corner up and in right about here. That looks good. Do the same thing for this corner. Click and drag in. That'll bring this up to there. Now here's another fun trick. If I hold down the Command and the Option key, this will allow me to click on a corner or any edge piece and create a corner. So with Command and Option held down, click right about here and drag up, and you can see how that adds a point to wherever you're clicking, and it creates a nice little curve right there. So we're going to click and drag this up to about that point. Don't worry if it's off by a little bit, we'll fix that in just a second. Let's do the same thing for the other side. Again, going over here, hold down both Command and Option, click on this corner piece and drag up. This will create that sideburn. From here we can hold down the Command key and we can fix any curves in order to cover up that particular side. We can also click on this edge and drag it in from here. Let's do the same on this side. Holding down just the Command key, drag it in, and then adjust the bottom curve as well. Now to create the little widow's peak at the top, this is where we hold down Command and Option, click right in the center, and then drag it down till the little peak is created. From here we can go back in and we can readjust our artwork to get it looking the way we like. So in this case, maybe I'll click on this little edge and drag this down a little bit more. I think that looks better. Same way for this edge. Drag that down, put that into perspective. I'll go back up and show my entire frame, and this should be close to what your artwork should look like. Now up until this point, everything we've drawn has been on the head layer, so all of our little head and the hair is all on the same layer within our timeline. We want to be able to draw off all of the facial features on a separate layer. So let's go down to our timeline, and I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this the face layer. With that done, I'm going to lock down my head layer, and also I'm going to turn off visibility of my head layer by clicking on the little eyeball icon in the middle. Notice that when you do that, your layer disappears. It's no longer visible, but we're still working on the face layer. This way I can see my sketch underneath it as I draw off each of the facial features. Now, if you're following along in the book, we're on page 277. The book is going to assume that you have a digital drawing tablet in order to draw off many of these features. And the advantage of that is that it has a pressure sensitivity that lets your lines be thicker and thinner. However, if you don't have a digital drawing tablet, that's okay. I'm going to show you how to set this up. Let me take just a minute and show you the two differences. If you're using a digital drawing tablet that has pressure sensitivity, go ahead and use the classic brush tool. This is the paintbrush that looks just like a regular paintbrush at the top of your toolbox. Notice that there is another brush called the fluid brush tool. We're not going to get into that one for this project. So if you have a drawing tablet, go ahead and use the classic brush panel and follow along with the book's instructions like I've done. However, if you don't have a digital drawing tablet, go down to the very bottom of your toolbox and open up the Edit toolbar. From here, you can find the Paintbrush tool. Now I know that looks very confusing, but the Paintbrush tool is different because it's got the little extra line going on top of it. I'm going to add this to my toolbox by clicking and dragging it onto the area. And this is the tool that I'm going to be using for the rest of this exercise. With this tool selected, we can close out our tool options and go over to our tool properties. I'm going to set my stroke color to be just a solid black, and I'm going to set the size of the stroke to be 18 pixels. Also, as far as the style goes, we'll keep it a solid line. However, we're going to change the width profile to this first profile that has a tapered edge on both sides. Also, make sure you're still in object drawing mode with that turned on. With that done, whenever I click and drag with my paintbrush, you can see how it gives me a tapered edge. Now I can see I accidentally set the size of my thing too high. Let's set that back down to 18 the way Lord intended. Now when I click and drag, those are the strokes that we need for this one. Again, I want to emphasize, you're welcome to use either drawing tool, but having a pressure sensitive tablet to draw with is appropriate to use for the classic brush. But if you don't have a drawing tablet, you're welcome to use the paintbrush tool to give you these tapered edges. So let's do our nose first. To do this, with my brush tool selected, simply click and drag and follow along with the line that's on your tracing. Once it's done, when you let go, it'll create the line, and that's all that you need because that's the only line that we're drawing. Now after doing this, if you've accidentally messed up or you don't like the results that you have, you can always go up to Edit and Undo, or you can readjust your line until you get something that you're pleased with. Now when you work with object drawing mode turned on, this only allows you to make one stroke at a time, which means if you're trying to draw something that's taken up with multiple strokes, we need to be able to work in a different way. Something like the mouth, you can see, is created using 1, 2, 3 different lines. So to do this, we're going to do a simple little trick that the book suggests. I'm going to zoom in on my little mouth, maybe zoom out a little bit more, and I'm just going to start off by drawing a simple line. Now when I draw that line, I'll use my black arrow selection tool and click on it, then double click on it. Notice that when I do this, it isolates just that drawing, and up at the top it goes into object drawing mode. Now within here, I can select and edit just this object and be able to add on to it as necessary. So if I clicked on this line, I can delete it away if necessary, and this won't affect any of the other drawings or things that I've created. We're just working in this one particular object. Now from here, I'm going to select my brush tool again, and here's one thing that's critical. Once you're inside of drawing object mode, turn off your object drawing mode. This way, whatever we draw, I'll be able to select the individual parts and draw multiple lines within it. I know it sounds confusing, but that's the way Animate tends to work. From here, now let's see if I can draw the 3 different lines. So here's one line. Here's another line. See if I can do that a little bit better. Now when you work in object drawing mode, there is another little thing. Notice that when I cross lines, it tends to create little funky drawing artifacts kind of like that. It's not necessarily the thing that I like, but that's what it does. In this case, since if it don't want to have the tapered edge, let's change up our width profile. Let's do this as a profile width number 4. Now when I click and drag, this will give me a tapered edge along one edge. That's what I like with that one. I can go back, select my other profile, and we'll do this bottom edge. From here, you can see I've drawn off 3 different lines, and it's all within that same object. Now I can go back up and click on Scene 1 to return here, and you can see I've got a bounding box that goes around all 3 of those lines. Before I do anything else, let's turn back on object drawing mode. Another place you can find the object drawing mode is down here at the very bottom. We'll turn that on so that the next line that I draw is back in regular drawing mode that we're used to. Now let's focus on doing the eyelids. I'll grab my paintbrush tool again. Again, do make sure object drawing mode is turned back on for your paintbrush. And I'm just going to click and drag and draw off one of the eyelids. Now in doing this, I want to add a color inside of the top part of my eyelid. So this is going to have 2 parts, the little outline at the bottom and then a little color up here at the top. To do this, I'm going to hold down the Command key and double click on my object. Again, this will take us into that object drawing mode. And as soon as you do this, turn off object drawing mode. So whatever you add goes into regular drawing mode to work in. With that done, let's go down and select our little line segment tool, or little line tool. And in our properties panel, let's set our stroke size to be just 1 pixel, so very, very thin. Also with it selected, here's a good tip. Go up to View, down to Snapping, and make sure, Snap to Objects is checked on. You want to be able to snap these points to each other as we draw the line. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start by clicking on this left edge and drag up, and then click here again and drag over. And you can see, because I've got object snapping turned on, it automatically snaps to that point. And this will create a basic bounding box. Then I can hold down the Control key and click on my line and be able to round off the edges. And you can click on any of these points and move them in however you see fit. So again, click here, then click up and over to create 2 different lines that are nice and connected together. Now we need to fill this in. To fill it in, look at the bottom of your toolbox and locate the Paint Bucket tool. With the Paint Bucket tool, we'll go over to our properties. Let's change our fill color back to that orange skin tone that we already selected. And whenever I fill this in, if I click in the middle of it, it should automatically fill in the entire area. Now, if for some reason yours is not filling in, here's one thing that you can check. Go down to the very bottom and you can change the gap size. So what Animate's looking for is the entire area, and if there's any gaps in it, this is where we can look into it. So if you changed your gap size to a larger type area, like closing large gaps, then that should be able to fill in the area that you have. But that only works if you can't fill it in from what you have. So once it's filled in, let's get rid of the black outline that's around the top edge. To do that, choose your black arrow selection tool and carefully click just on the line. You can see that line is now highlighted, and all you've got to do is hit the delete key to delete it away. And now you're left with just the filled in area at the top, and of course you've got your little outline down at the bottom. With one eyelid created, let's do the other eyelid. From here, let's go up to Scene 1, return to the regular scene. I'll grab my brush tool, and with the brush tool, let's make sure object drawing mode is turned on, and also while I'm here, I want to set my stroke size back to 18 points. Also, my width profile is back to that tapered edge. From here, I'll click and drag and draw off just the bottom of my eyelid. Then I can hold down Command and double click on that eyelid. This will take us into that object drawing mode. As soon as you go into object drawing mode, let's turn off object drawing mode from here. Now let's add the little top lid. To do that, grab your line tool. And with the line tool selected, let's set our stroke size to be really small, so all the way down to 1. See, it goes down to 0.1 now. Then we'll click on this corner edge and drag up, and then click on this corner edge and drag over to connect it to the other ends. Then you can round it off by holding down the Command key and clicking on the lines until you get the results that you'd like. Again, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but that'll give us something that we can work with. To fill this in, grab your Paint Bucket tool, and my Paint Bucket already has my fill color selected, but that's okay. And then click in the middle of it, that'll automatically fill in the entire area. Now to get rid of the black line, simply select your black arrow selection tool, carefully click on the black line, and delete it away. In my case, I've got to do it twice for both of those lines. Then I'm left with this solid area. Now that we're finished with this, I can go up to Scene 1 at the top and return back to my normal editing mode. So to draw off the rest of the eyes, the whites and the pupils, let's select our oval tool. With the oval tool selected, make sure drawing object mode is turned back on. And I'm going to set my fill color to be just a solid black, And make sure your stroke color is set to be none, so we won't fill in anything with that. Then all I have to do is click and drag. Holding down Shift will give me a perfect circle to create one pupil. And to quickly copy that pupil, I'm going to go up to my black arrow selection tool, select the pupil, then I can go up to Edit and Copy, then Edit and Paste. This will paste another one that I can drag over to this side. Another way of doing it, and we'll do this through the whites of the eye, is select my oval tool, go to my fill color. We're going to set this to be white. Let's click and drag. Again, yours doesn't have to be 100% perfect. We're just going to draw that off. Then you can use your black arrow selection tool to select the white. When you hold down Option to click and drag, this will automatically create a copy of whatever you clicked on. So two ways of quickly making a copy of something is either Command C and V to copy and paste, or use your black arrow to hold down the Option key to click and drag. Either one will work. Obviously, we need to send these to the back and behind everything that's here. So with your black arrow selection tool selected, hold down Shift and select both of the whites of your pupils. Then you can hold down the Command key and hit the down arrow on your keyboard. When you keep hitting it, it'll bring it or send it backwards one step at a time until it's behind everything that's on your drawing. From here, let's adjust the pupils until they fit and look nice on your drawing. In this case, I'm going to bring mine in just slightly, holding down Command, oops, to get it looking the way I want. That looks good from there. Finally, let's create the eyebrows at the top. Grab my brush tool. Still got my stroke set to black, but I'm going to set the width of that stroke back to 18. And then we'll click and drag, draw one, and click and drag and draw the other. Again, yours doesn't have to look 100% perfect. If it's off by a little bit on your original drawing, that's okay. All right, let's zoom back out. So I'll go up to Show All. With the eyes done, now let's focus on the two little tufts at the top of his head. In order to draw those, the other drawing tool I'm going to use is my pen tool. Again, I don't see my pen in my toolbox, so at the very bottom, I'm going to click on Edit Toolbar and look for the regular writing pen tool that's on the very top edge right here. With this tool, I'm going to click and drag it into my toolbox so I can use it. And with it selected, this allows you to draw just like in Adobe Illustrator by clicking on individual points. Going over to my Properties panel, I'm going to set my stroke color to be solid black. And I'm going to set my stroke size for now to be 5 points. Also, while I'm here, I'm going to change my width profile back to just a uniform line. Now, in order to draw these tufts, I need to see where my hairline is. So I'm going to go back down to my timeline and turn on visibility for my head so I can see it. Then from here, I'm going to zoom in so I can see a little bit better. Then with the pen tool selected, I'm going to create 3 different points to draw a triangle. Click once right here in the center, then move your cursor down and click again right about here, then move over here and click again, and then finally return to your original starting point and click again. This will create the 3 different points for your triangle. To curve off this triangle, use your black arrow selection tool. Then all you got to do is click on any one of the sides and drag it up. Notice that when you do this, you don't have to hold down the Command key because you've already got your selection tool selected. And you can drag and readjust it however you see fit for your drawing. Now to fill it in, the latest version of Animate has kind of a different way of doing this. Before, you should have been able to select your object and fill it in solidly. In this case, I can't do that. In our case, we have to use the Fill Bucket tool. So to do that, grab your fill bucket. Let's set our fill color to be that same hair color that we had before as this one here. And then click inside of it to fill it in. Let's create another little one on the side. Again, choose your pen tool. The pen tool selected, we're going to make 3 different points. So 1, 2, and 3. Now in this case, when I did this, it overlapped both of those. That's okay for now. When we close it off, we should be able to fill it in. So let's grab our paint bucket tool and fill it in with that solid color. Now to get rid of these extra lines, all I have to do is choose my black arrow selection tool, carefully click on just this line and delete it away, and then this line and delete it away as well. Again, with your black arrow selection, you can click on any of these points and round them over to get the results that you want. And that looks good for both of those. All right, now if you're following along with the book, we're on page 282, which is part 3 on making the accessories. One of the first things we want to do with this one is to go back to our timeline. I'm going to lock down my face layer so I don't accidentally destroy that. And let's make a new layer. And we're going to call this layer ACC, which is abbreviated for accessories. Also, while I'm here, I'm going to zoom out so I can see everything. And I'm going to go to my timeline and just turn off visibility for my face and for the head. That way I can see exactly what I'm working on. Now I'm going to do Command and the plus sign and zoom in to bring up just the little band-aid. Now the tool we're going to use to create this bandage, since it looks rectangular, is going to be the rectangle tool. With it selected, let's go over to our Properties panel, and down at the very bottom you can see some rectangle options. This will allow you to round off the rectangle that we're working in. From here, I'm going to give it a roundedness of about 15 pixels. Also, while we're over here, let's go ahead and set our fill color to be almost this kind of yellowish pink, this one right about here. And we're going to set our stroke size to be none, so I'm going to turn that to null. Now when I click and drag, you can see that I get a nice rounded rectangle. So when you click and drag it off, just kind of eyeball about the size. If yours is off by a little bit, that's okay. Now we want to make the bandage look like it's following the form of his cheek. So with our black arrow selection tool, let's double click on the bandage, and this will go into drawing object mode. Then we can use our free transform tool at the very top to select the bandage and click on the outside edge to rotate it to match the rotation of it. Now I'm going to put mine side by side so we can see what we're doing. Next, we want to be able to transform this so that it looks like it's warped and bulging out on one side. To do this, look at the very, very bottom of your your tool panel. With the transform tool selected, you can change up what mode you're working in by clicking here. When you open it up, by default it uses the free transform. You can do other kind of transformations, and the one that we want to use is the envelope distort. So choosing envelope distort, change that icon, and it'll give you a different set of little dots that you can click on. Now when we click on these middle dots, you can see that it will start to warp and bend the object that it has selected. So we're going to click on this middle one and bring it in just a little bit, and do the same thing for the other side, clicking and drag it out. Then I like to click on the little Bezier handles at the corner to match that curve as well. So bring those in and bring it around. Same way for the top, bring it in and around to match that up there. Now we've warped it to follow the curvature of our cheek. Once you're finished, you can hit the return key to lock it in, or just select a different tool to move away from that. All right, now let's move this back into place right on top of where the bandage should go. I'll zoom back out by going Fit to Window, and then we can return to Scene 1. Let's do the same trick with the hat at the very top. To do that, I'm going to go to my timeline, and let's turn on visibility for both the face and for the head, even though we're still working in this accessories layer. I'm going to select my rectangle tool, and with it selected, going over to my properties, let's set the fill color to be this medium red, and we're going to change the rectangle options to be about a smaller one. About 5 points will be okay for that. I'm also, while I'm here, going to set my stroke to be a solid black with a stroke size of about 5 points as well. Now to create the hat, all I got to do is click and drag and create a simple rounded rectangle that goes all the way across the top of his head. Now to distort it, we can choose our free transform and select our object. And again, we're working in that envelope distortion method. For this one, we can click and drag up to give a little bit of a curve. We'll let the bottom curve match that. Do make sure it's covering up the top portion of the little tufts. Then I'll click on these little Bezier curves to also match that curve. Now you can play around with the look and feel and even location of it. I also want to click on the outside edge, give that a little bit of a curve too, to bulge that out. To lock that in, all you got to do is deselect it to commit to that transformation. Now we can create the rounded oval at the very top. So I'm going to choose my oval tool and then click and drag just to kind of rough in that particular shape. I can hold down the Command key with my oval tool and kind of nudge it into place, or I can use my free transform tool to click on it and change the size and placement of whatever I need from this one. Whichever option or method you're most comfortable with, just knowing what to do with those tools is half the battle. Now of course when I create this, it's on top of everything, so I'm going to select it, hold Command and press the down arrow to move it to the very back. And looking at this, now I can kind of adjust everything as necessary to make it either larger or smaller in order to fit the needs of the entire design. But once you get something that you like, you can move on to the next part. Maybe I'll make the hat just slightly smaller, pull off to that side. I think that's looking good. Now the next thing the book's going to have us do is to place a texture inside of this hat. Animate deals with this a little bit kind of strangely, but let me step you through how to set this up. The first thing we want to do is to import the texture that we're going to use. In order to do that, let's go up to File, down to Import, and let's just import it to the stage. From here, find that texture JPEG that you should have downloaded from the class Moodle page and click Open. Now this is going to put the texture right in the middle. All we've got to do is just drag it off to the side right here. Now in order to place this texture inside of an object, let's select the object first. In this case I've selected just the top part or bottom part of this hat. We can then go over to the Object Properties panel and click on the fill color for it. If you'll notice down at the very bottom there's now a new texture swatch that has that texture that we imported. So Animate treats this single texture or picture as its own individual swatch. With it selected, you can see it's applied. Let's do the same thing to the top. So select the top of the hat, choose Fill, and then carefully select the texture at the very bottom. Now, if you want to change the size of the two different textures you have selected, notice that the one on top is slightly larger than the one on the bottom. We need to use our Gradient Transform tool. Gradient Transform, even though it's not a gradient of color, allows you to also transform patterns that are inside of it. So with it selected, you can click on the object inside, and I'm going to back out just a little bit. You'll see that there's a bounding box that goes around the entire picture. If you click on the edge, you can drag it in. You can see how it will scale down that entire picture, and eventually you'll start to tile it in. So I'm going to make this one slightly smaller. And to commit to that, all you got to do is click off. Then let's click on the top portion. Again, you get a bounding box around that, and you can click and drag it in and scale it down to match the bottom portion as well. Now, in order to turn this back into a red cap, what we want to do is to apply a low opacity red fill on top of the entire design. Here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to zoom in, so first of all, so I can see it. And use your black arrow selection tool and hold down Shift to select both parts of the cap. So I've got both the top and the bottom. With both of those selected, let's turn it into a symbol. So I'm going to two-finger click on it and choose Convert to Symbol. Remember, F8 is the keyboard shortcut. It's going to ask what kind of symbol do you want to create. Uh-oh, no crash report. And we're going to call this the hat. The type is going to be simply a graphic, and we'll keep center registration. Everything else is the same. And we'll say OK. Now that it's a symbol, I can go over to my Properties panel, and one of the properties we can do is a color effect. Inside the color effect, let's choose a tint of a color, And then from here we can dial in whatever color that we want. So let's open up the fill color that we have and choose that red on top of this. From here you can then adjust the amount or the tinting to that particular color and also the degree of red that you want. So a very bright red and a very high opacity red. Notice that it applies the amount of red over the entire object, including the stroke that's on there as well. So it's kind of weird to do that, but that's how Adobe Animate handles coloring and colorizing textures. You have to convert it to a symbol and then apply the color effect on top of that symbol. Now let's apply a texture to the bandage. I'll zoom down to the bandage and do Command and the plus sign to zoom in to see it a little better. Just like we did with the hat, let's select the bandage and convert it to a symbol as well. So right click or two finger click, choose Convert to Symbol, and we'll call this the bandage. Still save as a graphic. We'll say OK to that. And we want to be able to do just part of this having a texture. So I'm going to double click on my bandage to go into that draw isolation mode. Now I know it's going to be kind of difficult to see, so for mine I'm going to drag it off the cheek just so we can differentiate it between everything else that I'm working on. You can keep yours in place if you can see yours. Now, since we drew this with drawing object mode turned on, we want to turn this into a regular object. So we need to break it apart. So with it selected, go up to Modify and choose Break Apart. And you can see now it's filled in with the solid dots or the individual little dot pattern. Now we can take this and we can actually break it into different sections. Now from here, the instructions in the book tend to be a little bit more complex than what's necessary to achieve your final results. So I'm going to show you an easier method of breaking this apart than what the book is going to show you. To do that, I'm going to choose my line tool, go over to your options, and let's turn off object drawing mode. So make sure that's deselected. I'm also going to set my stroke to be relatively small. We'll keep it, say, 1 point. And we can keep the color of it at black. All I want to do is use the line to draw two different lines going across it to break my bandage up into 3 different sections. Now I should be able to use my black arrow selection tool and click on each of the different parts. With that done, I'm going to select this top part and hold down Shift and select this bottom part. So notice both of those are what's highlighted. From here, we can go into our fill. Let's choose that texture color at the very bottom. There it is. And you may have to zoom out to see this, but let's now choose our gradient transform tool. And with it selected, we can click on the texture inside of it and scale it down. You may have to select both different sides. There we go. And scale down both different parts. And we can deselect to go away from that. Now I can zoom back in. To get rid of the black lines, choose your black arrow selection tool and carefully click on the different segments of the line and erase those away. Even the inside segments can go away at this point too. In the book, it would have had you create multiple different objects and several different layers, and to be honest, that's a little bit of an overkill. We got the same results, and this is what I'm looking for. Now that we've applied the texture to both the different sides, let's go back to Scene 1. And let's apply our trick to recolorize this. So with it selected, go to your Properties panel and choose your color effect. Let's do a tint. And then from the tint, let's choose that bandage color that we had. And then you can adjust the tint color and brightness and whatever you need in order to get it looking the results that you want. I like that and that looks good. I'm going to back out and then use my arrow tool to move it back into place, back onto there. The last thing we're going to do for this face is to add a little gradient to the nose. So I'm going to zoom in on the nose and using your black arrow, I'm also going to go down to my timeline because I forgot I have this area particularly locked down, and let's unlock those facial features. There we go. Now I can select my nose and double click to go into isolation mode. We want to fill in this area with a gradient. So I'm going to choose my line tool. With the line tool, make sure your draw object mode is turned off. Your stroke is set to a black color and the size of it is set to 1. We want to create a line going from this point here and then dragging over and connecting it to the point on the right hand side. Now to fill this area in, we are going to use our paint bucket tool. So select the tool, but instead of using the default fill color that's found under the properties for the tool, we're going to open up our color panel. Here's the color panel up at the very top. Now with the paint bucket selected, we want to be able to apply this just to the fill color. So select the fill paint bucket at the very top and change it from solid color to a radial gradient. With radial gradient selected, you've got 2 or more different swatches down at the bottom that you can apply to your fill color. In our case, we want this first swatch, by double clicking on it, to pick the flesh orange color. The second swatch, by double clicking on it, will let you pick the second color. In this case, I'm going to choose kind of a darker red. So now when it fills in, it's not going to fill in a solid color, it'll fill in a radiation color or radial color from a central point outward, in this case going from the flesh tone to a red. With your paint bucket, you can click on the inside and it will fill it in. Now it doesn't look like it filled it in with a gradient color, instead it looks like it's filled in with just a solid color. Here's what's happening. I'm going to zoom out by going up to my zoom area, do fit to window to show me everything. Then I'm going to choose my gradient selection tool and with the gradient transform tool. With this gradient transform tool turned on, you can see there's a little circle up here at the very top. This is the transformation for the gradient. I'm going to click on this center point here and drag it down and into the central point of my nose. Now from here, I can click on any of these parts on the edge and be able to change up the transformation of it. For instance, I can bring it in, make it larger or smaller. I'll zoom in so we can see this a little better. I can change up the skew and width of it. And of course, if I click on the central point, I can change the starting and stopping point of it as well. So I'm going to set this right here at the very top and have it kind of radiate going down on the nose. Maybe make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to click on the edge and bring it down so that it starts centrally being orange and gets redder as it moves out. Now that I've filled that in, we can go back up to our scene 1, go back to our regular nose, and you can see how it's been filled in with this. Uh-oh, I forgot to do one thing. I didn't get rid of the little line. If that happens to you, all you've got to do is double click on the object to go back into that draw mode and carefully click on the line and delete it away. Now we're finished. Now we can go back to scene 1 and we've got our nose nice and complete. With that done, let's zoom back out. We'll do show all. I'm going to get rid of my little texture, delete it away, and I'm going to go down to my sketch layer and click on the little transparency icon to turn off visibility for that, although I still want it to be a part of my final design. From here you can also unlock your other layers and clean up any part of the little head that you've created. Now that we're finished, you can go up to File and Save. If you haven't done so already, do make sure to add your name to the beginning of this, and this is going to be your name, solid drawing, and the file format can be an animate document. This animate document is what you're going to upload to Moodle once you finish.